Hello and welcome to episode 140 of Aviadev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of Aviadev Africa. Today, I'm joined by a good friend, Derek Nseko from AirNews, the longest established African aviation journal. Derek's also a regular contributor to CNBC and is somebody that's worked with me and worked with Aviadev for some years, supporting our drive to educate the next generation. And together we've actually delivered outreach events in Port Elizabeth and Cape Town, to mention just a couple. Today, we are recording on October the 1st, which is a historic day as South Africa, Zimbabwe, Uganda are opening their borders to international passengers for the first time since the pandemic. So in today's podcast, what we're going to talk about is, have there been any winners as a result of the pandemic? What's going to happen to fleets within Africa? What do we think the future holds in that respect? Is testing the silver bullet that the industry needs, and the opportunities for the next generation, whether they should feel encouraged or discouraged. So welcome back to the podcast, Eric.
Thank you, John, for having me again, and hello to your listeners and viewers.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So let's start with AirNews. We signed a recent media partnership with AirNews, and it's great to be working with you. And the podcast is actually now sitting on the homepage, which is fantastic. So give us a little bit of an overview of AirNews and its role within African aviation.
Yeah, John, and thank you so much for getting together and making this collaboration happen as well. We are very keen to collaborate across the continent because we are firm believers in collaboration just as much as you are. Now, I just have to give you a bit of a background with AirNews. We've been in existence for close to half a century. AirNews was formed in 1973 by a couple, Tom and John Chalmers. Unfortunately, Tom is not with us anymore. But Tom was an excellent journalist who was actually the youngest news anchor at the SABC in the 70s. And he happened to have a passion for aviation. So he eventually went into aviation and worked with Comair as well. He became a very experienced pilot with Comair. So AirNews was actually a merger between these two passions in the 1970s. Now, an interesting fact, in around 1975, World AirNews was actually the first organization to host an air show of international standard in South Africa. So that was around 1975, and AirNews started playing a very huge role because, as we all know, the political situation in South Africa was very tricky because of apartheid. South Africa was excluded from most of the world, and AirNews started to play a very huge role in bridging the gap between South African aviation and the rest of the world. That event actually continued to happen, and it became an African event that happened in other African countries as well. I'm very proud to say as well that ever since its inception in 1973, we have not missed a single month. At AirNews, we've not missed a single deadline. We've published every single month. Yeah, but 2020 has obviously been a very difficult year for all of us, as you all know and your listeners know. But what it's really done for us is it's helped us accelerate the transition to digital. As we all are changing our behaviors as the world moves on. This is becoming very much a digital world. So we are adapting and moving with the times, and we're putting out more and more digital publications. Right now, I can tell you we've got a readership of over 40,000 across Africa. AirNews covers the entire African continent. We were the only magazine that was still available in print in shelves in South Africa. So that just speaks to our resilience as an organization. But we're here to help Africa recover from this slump. We're here to tell the stories of African aviation and to help aviation companies across the globe and in Africa put their products out to avid readership.
Great, fantastic. And it's wonderful for us to obviously have this collaboration, and something that we've preached since day one is we're going to be stronger together. So let's all work together, let's support each other. And yeah, it's a great magazine, and there isn't anything quite like actually picking up a physical piece of print and having a read as well. But of course, as you say, we do have to adapt to this digital world. So it's great to have AirNews on board.
Yes. And a lot of people, John, are still there's a lot of people who are still, you could call them old-fashioned, but there's a lot of people who still love to have their print, yeah? So we are still putting out the print magazine for that reason. There's a lot of people who want to have that magazine on their desks, and that magazine is very easy to share. We actually did a survey that showed that for most of the print magazines that are received, they're read by up to about 5 people. So that is a huge roll-on effect from having the print magazine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, just like we're doing today, you can't dictate how content is consumed. So we're going to put this out as a video and also as a podcast as well, depending on your preference. You can consume it in either way. So let's talk about where we find ourselves. We're on the 1st of October, 2020. We're 6 months into the pandemic. The borders in a few of the countries are opening. So have there been any, we like to be optimistic. So let's talk about the winners as opposed to the losers, because we only got a short time to talk. If we're talking about the losers, we could be here for quite a long time. So what about the winners from the pandemic? Who's been winning on the African continent?
Yeah, John, it's amazing that after all these months, today we have some really important countries that are opening their borders. South Africa, obviously, which is where I'm seated at the minute. Zimbabwe, which is also my second home, and Uganda, which is my primary home. They're all actually opening on the same day. So I'm very happy about that. The lockdown has obviously been, it's an unprecedented event, but it's also been an unprecedented opportunity for the entire aviation industry. I don't think we'll ever have an opportunity like this one. You're talking about winners, and I was just thinking in a very twisted way, some of the losers from African aviation might actually have been winners in this COVID crisis. I mean, if you look at our recent history, most of our airlines have been losing money. There's a lot of airlines that I believe, there's a lot of companies on the African continent for which this has actually been a very convenient mask. It's helped them paper over their cracks. I mean, we're talking about, this is a convenient time to be asking for bailouts. Yeah, we're having all sorts of regulatory breaks, that we're asking for. For me, in some way, the losers are actually the winners in this crisis. There's an airline, no names, in the southern part of this continent that has also had the convenience of going through an entire restructuring, AKA a business rescue process. I mean, John, you could literally compare this to your beloved Man United having a flurry of injuries in March, April to their key players, and then
having
a work of God coming through and having the Premier League suspended until such a time that their key players are back and ready to go. Yeah, so that's literally what has happened. Yeah, in that situation, I believe. But to just reinforce the aspect of the winners, I think. And I talk about this a lot, I think we always have to highlight the one single airline that is really a shining example in this African continent, and that's Ethiopian Airlines. And I think someone spoke on your podcast recently and said that their agility is really their competitive advantage, and that ability to move quickly, in the face of changes, that are happening, and to be able to move and to adapt and to change, that is really what sets them apart. At the start of the lockdown, there was obviously a gap. There was a gap from from the fall of South African Airlines. There was a gap from the decline of Kenya Airways. Two of the other giants on the African continent were very quick to cover this gap. The gap in cargo capacity, they moved on that really, really quickly. Ethiopian Airlines more than doubled their cargo capacity. They converted about 25 aircrafts that were previously passenger aircrafts, and they turned them into cargo aircrafts. The ability to be able to do that and to act really quickly in doing that is just something that we do not have anywhere else on the African continent. And this is not just the reason why they're doing well in the now. Yeah, obviously now they do have the resources, they have the flexibility to be able to make certain decisions easier than other airlines in Africa. But we also have to look at the reasons why they are in the position that they're in now, yeah, which is a position that so many other airlines in Africa have been in, yeah, and they've been in that position for a very long time. But they embarked on a long journey, a strategy with principles, with a plan, you know, and they stuck to it. And I wrote about this very recently. They are long-term thinkers and they are very ambitious. Yeah, a lot of the time on this African continent, we have our leaders, we have our airlines, yeah, they come up and speak and pay lip service to their ambitions. That's all that we do on the African continent, yeah. We speak about all the grandeur that we dream of, but we don't really put it into action. Yeah, and Ethiopian Airlines is the only airline that has managed to do this, and through the lockdown, to have an airline come out from the lockdown. We are looking at airlines across the world asking for their governments to bail them out. All the major airlines across the world. Ethiopian Airlines came out and spoke about how they did not need to get a bailout through the lockdown. I mean, that is just amazing, even if you compare it on an international level. Yeah, they managed to stay afloat through cargo. They performed more repatriation flights than any other company across the continent. They were assisting other countries to do repatriation flights. And at the beginning of the lockdown, we had airlines that were already putting out estimates of how much they were going to need in terms of bailout to go through the crisis. Meanwhile, Ethiopian Airlines
was getting on with it.
Yes, was getting on with it. They were asking themselves, how are we going to go through this without having to go to our governments, because our governments cannot afford to support us? That is just a very different mindset that they have. Yeah, and we need to learn from it, John.
100%. I mean, I know at the height of the pandemic, they had something like 100 flights a week going to China, and they were bringing that PPE to Africa and then obviously spreading that across Africa and bringing it to the other countries. But even more than that, they were taking it to other continents. You know, Ethiopia was a hub to do that. And you've touched on some of the reasons why they were able to do it. You know, they have a great MRO facility and the technicians on site to make those changes to the aircraft. But I do like your point of, well, others were sort of sat in the boardroom working out how much money they'd need. They were adapting and being agile, and it was Miratab from Ethiopian that talked about that. So, you know, we're not here we have to give them a bit of love because they're giving a bit of light in the darkness at the moment. But yeah, you know, let's see how the future pans out. So let's talk a little bit about fleets. You talked about the adaptation that they produced. They changed their passenger aircraft into cargo carrying aircraft very quickly. But I want to talk more about just a general sea change. What we've seen globally is, of course, the big four-engined, you know, the jumbo jet 747, the A380s, the A340s. They're all being sort of parked or not being used as much as they were, or not being used at all, or being retired. You know, how do you see the future of fleet development in the African context, and what kind of routes are going to be requiring these particular aircraft?
I think what's happening right now, obviously because of the size of the industry, we are going through a right sizing. Yeah, and we often speak about right sizing only in terms of aircraft, but we are right sizing our entire industry. All our companies are right-sizing across the board. And it's not just the aircrafts, they're right-sizing their networks. They are right-sizing their workforce. Yeah, lots of people are losing their jobs across the industry. And this is not just aviation. So the industry has shrunk. We have too many seats available for the size of the market right now. We have too many aircrafts available for the size of the market. Companies are too big. Companies have aircrafts that are too big for the routes that they've been operating. So what we're doing is right sizing at the moment. Yeah, you touched on the super jumbos, the A380s and A340s. I think that is a prime example of what COVID has done to our industry. I think obviously the era of these mega aircrafts is definitely going to be in the past. We do not have the numbers. Africa has the smallest aviation market in the world. Yeah. How are we going to start having very large wide bodies moving within the continent? Yeah. So what's happening is, I think the larger aircrafts, and we can see it even with the OEMs, the aircrafts that are going to be delivered in the immediate future are the narrower body aircrafts. There's no doubt about that, because the routes have become much thinner. So as far as Africa is concerned, it's the regionals that are actually helping us ease out of the crisis even now. Yeah. Seen our domestic markets have become much more active. We've seen that in South Africa as well before the international have opened. We'll see how that will pan out. Domestic markets, regional markets, those are the areas that are helping us recover and ease out. And the aircrafts that serve those markets are the smaller aircrafts, the smaller regional aircrafts, sub 100 seats, So I believe in terms of fleet, we are definitely leaning up big time, and we are moving to these smaller aircrafts that make more economic sense in a thinner market, and in a market that has lower load factors than before.
And that excites me to an extent, because I've always been an advocate of intra-African connectivity first and foremost. And those aircraft, of course, don't have the range to then, fly intercontinentally. So they're going to have to be deployed on domestic and regional routes. I saw a couple of statistics. I was doing a presentation this week, did a bit of research, and about 40% of all African traffic is domestic. Only 25% is regional, and then 35% is intercontinental, is longer haul. And that compares to something like 9% in Europe, 11% in the US, so we're much more reliant at the moment as an industry on that intercontinental traffic, which of course is a concern. But where there's green shoots when it comes to that, and this brings me on to the next question, is there's a prediction in the world generally now that people are not going to want to transit through hubs necessarily and change planes for sanitation reasons. So there's a rise in ultra long haul. We have these new aircraft, with these new generation aircraft that are much more efficient, can fly further with lower loads. And obviously United have announced Johannesburg, Accra, Lagos that are going to start next year. So it's definitely their strategy. Do you think this is a trend that will continue? Does it make sense to you?
I think in the context of this year, it definitely makes sense. From pre-COVID, this was without a doubt an emerging business model. It is very niche, but it was driven by the change in aircraft design, these new engines, ultra long haul engines that are replacing the 4-engine aircrafts that were much less efficient. We've had the emergence of very modern aircrafts, the Boeing 787, the Airbus A350, those have been the game changers. And pre-COVID, we saw Project Sunrise was a shining example that was really proof that perhaps the era of ultra long haul has dawned upon us. Yeah, and it's all being driven by these new generation aircrafts, new generation engines. It's point to point. There's definitely a business case to make for it, even without the case of without putting COVID-19 into context. But if you now put COVID-19 into context, it just accelerates that a great deal, because now we are thinking we want to avoid the crowded spaces. We want to avoid these mega hubs. Yeah, and it's very interesting because this is now point-to-point travel, which now threatens the hub and spoke model. Yeah, so it's hub and spoke versus point-to-point. Yeah, but our priority right now is public health. Yeah, and to minimize transmissions as much as possible as well. So moving point to point. And now with the way the environment is unfolding, you have cities that are safer than others. You have countries that are more restrictive than others. You have countries that are letting you in and countries that are not letting you in. The only way to connect one safe point to another safe point, yeah, the only way to connect those ideal cities or to connect this business hub to this one is really just point-to-point travel. I believe this is the future. There's no doubt about it. And I see a future whereby every city, perhaps in the whole world, will definitely have a point-to-point connection, will have a point-to-point route connection in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that potentially could happen, and we saw earlier this week that Qatar have launched into Accra now, but that is they're doing Doha, Lagos, Accra, Doha, I believe. Yes. So there's also the opportunity to use the same aircraft so that you can stay in the same seat, not disembark, feel comfortable, and literally do these kind of milk run routes. And I know that it's an antiquated term to say that. And I know that the airlines like our friends at Askai in Togo, they do one down to Johannesburg that has 2 or 3 stops on the way down. But if it gets you from point A to point B, you're sat in the same seat. Yes, it takes some time. That might be the reason they're doing that, is because you need to get the loads to a level where it's economically viable. And the stats from IATA that came out yesterday said that the load factor in Africa was under 35% in August. Now, we know as aviators that you need to be up at 75, 80, 85, depending on your business model to break even. So, it shows that even when the aircraft are operating, they're operating at a loss, with the exception of certain routes. So that's why I wanted to ask you about, if we're looking at optimistic side, we've heard in the papers, and I've interviewed a couple of people about new airline startups. And of course, if you're coming into this without the legacy debt and without those issues, maybe it is the right time. So how do you see that taking hold? Is this going to be just the odd one, or do you think there'll be a move towards this, or does it depend on how much support governments give to the state carriers, or all of the above?
I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of support as well, even this COVID period, in terms of the airlines. They're not being given the support that I thought they would get. And that is exactly what has actually created a market opportunity for new airlines to come in, because there definitely is there's various gaps in the various markets across Africa at the moment. South Africa has a new airline in the offing. There's a market opportunity that Gideon Novik, who you interviewed recently, has taken up. And it's going to be very interesting because we now have airlines in the country that are in trouble. Yeah, Mango is in trouble, Comea was in trouble, SAA, its future changes every week. Yeah, so it's going to be very interesting, and I think that is the kind of opportunity for airline entrepreneurs and airline startups to take up. So COVID-19, there's no doubt that this has been an unprecedented opportunity. We have never had a chance to pause for such a long time, yeah, and to reset and to rethink, yeah, and for an entrepreneur to sit down, yeah, and look at a level playing field, yeah, and say, this is my time to come out of this. Yeah, and it's not just South Africa. In West Africa, we have airlines that are literally in the waiting. I don't know what's happening with, is it WestJet? Yeah, and then Green.
Jet
Green,
West. Yeah, WestJet's
yes,
the
yes,
Canadian
Jet,
operator. Yeah,
Jet West. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I think these are the opportunities in Africa at the moment. Yeah, and I hope these opportunities come with new business models. I hope we can definitely create a new market that we can develop on the African continent for the African traveler. So I'm very optimistic about this.
Yeah, great. I think absolutely. I mean, in terms of the support side, I believe at the moment it's Rwanda, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, and Seychelles that have actually committed money. And of course, there are competing priorities for government cash. But I also believe, and if anybody wants to go and listen back to the interview I did last week with Raphael Cucci, he was also talking about the challenges with sort of financing on an African wide level as well, and where that there
more
needs to be agreement on how. Yeah, well, we need to agree how that money is going to be apportioned once it's been agreed. You know, because as you pointed out at the beginning of the podcast, there were some companies that went into this who have just been, who had viable businesses, who've been hit for six by the fact that COVID came along. There were others that were limping into the crisis for whom it's an opportunity to pause or to get more support, etc. And if there's one thing positive, it is that governments, and this is what I was talking about, I posted this morning saying, governments now must understand the value of aviation because it's brought them PPE that they would not have been able to get without aircraft coming into the continent. It is now going to rebuild their economies, and it's going to be much harder to rebuild if we have no airlines than if we have some that we keep resuscitating. You know, we keep them on life support, but not just on the same terms. Everything then needs to be conditional. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be commercial in terms of its approach. And there are going to be hard decisions in terms of staffing and retrenchments and getting the right size of workforce for the airline as well, which has always been a problem, you know, with certain airlines in the African market as well. So, you know, there are opportunities. I guess what I'm saying is we have to start again. We can't just ask for money to keep the same thing going because we're going to get the same results in a tougher market. It's now the time for the entrepreneurs like Gidon to do it. So have you had a guess? I think he's put it out to public tender for what would you like the name to be? You don't have to disclose it, but are you going to have a guess?
I did submit my idea, John. I did.
Good, right? Well, I'll have a think about it, and that's a really cool. You know, this Gidon is somebody who's got.
I found it very interesting.
Side. It's a great way to get engagement, is to have a say into the brand or maybe into the designs. I really hope it's something that reflects the sort of South African spirit and the African spirit, but let's see.
It's brilliant because he's getting us hooked already into the brand. Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
That's just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So just in terms of the absence, you know, where we're at right now, we need to get travelers confident. We need to get people flying. We're talking about it all the time about vaccines. To me, that's a long way away. So, you know, testing has to be the solution. Do you agree with that? And how, you know, where do we go from here in terms of that? Because we're not scientists, so we can't be the ones creating these tests.
I totally agree with you, John, because obviously, if we look to the health experts, we don't have a solution yet. We don't have a cure for COVID. So our job now is to try and minimize the transmissions as much as possible. Yeah, the only way to do that and to allow travel to continue to recover. Yeah, in an upward trajectory is to look at the way we are tasting and to find a way to make travel more convenient for the traveler, and to find a way to keep our countries safe at the same time, and to also keep the cost of travel down as much as we possibly can. So that's a very tricky balancing act. But I was very interested to learn, I think this past week, World Health Organization came out to say that there's a new test that has come out that can give us results within 15 to 30 minutes. Yeah. Even the Nigerian government came out recently to say they've developed a test that can do 40 minutes. Not been approved yet, but I found that very interesting. It's their gift to the global health community. Yeah. Yeah, which is very interesting. So I think if we can perfect this two-test protocol, yeah, testing before traveling, testing after once we've arrived, I think it definitely can work. And if we can find a way to integrate it properly into the travel experience, perhaps have the test done at the airport, yeah. And if we could even have the airlines more invested in this whole process, just to standardize everything. You don't want to get to the airport and go through one process, go through another, only to get to the end of the line and to be told the airline prefers this, you know, but the airport was doing this, or your doctor did this, you know. So we need to find a way to standardize this whole thing across the board.
That's
So I think
100%
that's
right.
what's important. Yeah.
Standardization and harmonization, but that takes
Yeah.
time. It takes time to get the approvals across borders. And of course, you know, this is really, the airlines can play their part, but what I think, you know, IATA are pushing for as much as everybody else is that they don't want a two-test system. They want you to be tested on departure, and that gives you access to where you're arriving, because one of the things that's damaging customer confidence, you know, if I thought I was coming down to see you in South Africa and I'm negative, I have my test for 72 hours, whatever it may be, and when I arrive, I run the risk, then somebody on the plane or whatever, and I arrive and they say, right, you know, you've now got to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. Well, I was only planning on coming for 2 days. I have a family. I don't want, who's going to pay for that quarantine? You know, all those things that that kind of kick in, I suppose. So that's the big concern, and that's why they're pushing for this. But it's about the science being there, and then the government's adopting that science. And I can see it, unfortunately, being, well, we're not accepting that test from that country, we've got our own one, and it being fragmented. And I really hope that doesn't happen. And that's the job of IATA, of the World Health Organization, to build, you know, build that sort of, you know, that confidence back.
I think the good thing, it's both a good and a bad thing, is that this whole situation is changing every single week. So you never know what we'll have in a month in terms of testing, you know, in terms of the whole COVID or travel environment, or what more convenient protocols we can come up with. So, I mean, last month was very different. Yeah. We had situations whereby you have to wait 48 hours for your test result. Now you can wait for less than an hour. So I can only just hope that as we move forward, we keep evolving this whole thing, and the travel just keeps getting the boost that it requires.
100%. So the final question I wanted to ask you is, obviously you're a pilot. I didn't even introduce you. You've got so many hats that, you know, I didn't even say that, but you've been on the podcast previously and we've talked about that. And when you were on the podcast, it was a very different world. And we were talking about inspiring the next generation. We were actually talking about there being a shortage of pilots, of qualified pilots and qualified aviators in the world. So what are you telling those in the next generation that are either embarked on a journey to become an aviator, to become a pilot or cabin crew or an engineer or a mechanic, whatever it may be? What are you telling them now? You know, how can we make sure that we don't lose this generation because they don't see a future in aviation?
Yeah, what I'm telling the young people now is that you see, this industry, it's had cycles before. This is not, well, the extent of this crisis is obviously unprecedented, but we've had cycles of high and low demand over the years for a very long time. Yeah, aviation training takes years. Yeah, if you get into a university or a flying school now, yeah, by the time you come out, there's no doubt, unless we have a COVID 2.0 or something down the road, but there's no doubt that the industry will be in a better place in 3 years' time. But also what's important as a lesson from COVID is to have that diversity in scale to be able to adapt to a changing landscape. And aviation is changing as well. As much as we'll be in a better place, it's still not going to be the same. Yeah, so Reminds me, I was speaking to someone recently who was really gutted that they've not been able to get into an aviation course because of finances, and they're now busy doing another job. And I told this person that this is actually excellent. Yeah, you know, you're picking up a whole other skill, you're getting experience in a whole different environment. Yeah, you have an opportunity to save your money or whatever. Yeah, but by the time you get back on your feet and you're ready to get into this industry, the time will be right. You'll have you'll be more dynamic as a professional. You'll have an extra skill. You'll have more value to offer to whatever it is, your company that you go to an airline. So I think with the young people now, it's about having a wider scope. Yeah, it's about having that wider scope, but still not letting go of your dream. Yeah, there's no letting go of the dream. You have to hold on to it. Yeah, through thick and thin. Yeah, but to be adaptable and to be able to offer something else. Yeah, in situations like this, I think that's what's important. But the young generation, I do not feel that people's dreams have been dented because of this crisis. I still see optimism. A dream is a dream. If you want to fly, you want to fly, no matter what the economic situation is. That people's dreams are still intact. But it's all about the reality, obviously, of the workplace, and it's definitely going to change.
Yeah, patience is the key. I mean, you've got a whole life ahead of you, and if it's a couple of years where you're not going to be able to pursue the dream, but then we do get the recovery that's predicted, and the jobs do come back, then there's still a long way in those careers. So I think that's it's a great rallying call. So that's everything that you've got time for today, Derek. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It'd be great to catch up in person, and thanks for the mention of my beloved Manchester United. That's always welcome. Always welcome, especially after a victory last night.
I had to slot that in as well. Yeah. It's been a pleasure, John. Always great chatting to you. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, likewise. And let's keep the optimism flowing. I'll put the link in the show notes, both to Derek's personal LinkedIn and also to the AirNews website, so you can get subscribed and check everything out on there. And of course, the podcast will be available on the website there as well. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you to everybody out there for taking the time to listen. As always, all that we ask is that you hit that share button now wherever you're listening, and you share this episode with one person in your network you think is going to benefit from having a listen. And we will be back very soon to keep the optimism flowing. So thanks for joining us, and take care.